to not be able to recall things as fast as we used to. Do I have any senior citizens that would agree? But then there are some times that we forget because of the length of time that things have happened. And we tend not to be able to recall it so readily. Can anybody identify with that? Then sometimes we forget because of the importance of the matter that we are dealing with. It's not so important to us or significant to us that we tend to register it as being important in our memory. And it soon fades away. But then there is a time that we forget because we really want to forget. Anybody ever have anything they want to forget? You know, and look like sometimes it just keep coming back up, and I want to forget that. But then sometimes there's a time that expressions are given that we have forgotten, but we really don't forget. That happens many times when people borrow money from you. Look like that is one of the most forgetful things that can happen. They get amnesia. They forget when they owe you money. But in our lesson here today, we find that God is speaking unto the children of Israel. And as he's speaking to the children of Israel, we find that God had done a great work for the children of Israel. God wanted them to remember what he had done for them. That's why we sing the song, Jesus, I'll never forget what you've done for me. Jesus, I'll never forget how you brought me out. Jesus, I'll never forget how you set me free. The Lord had brought the children of Israel out of a stage of known as slavery when they were found to be in bondage down in Egypt land. Under Pharaoh and the Egyptian had taken them captive and made slaves out of his people. They were down there for more than 400 years, and during that time, they worked and they labored, but they had nothing to show for it. They had slave masters, and they was instructed what to do and how to do, and they cried out to God and asked God to deliver them, and God heard their cry. When they cried out to God and said that they wanted to worship the Lord, and they were not free to be able to worship God the way that they desired, and they wanted to be able to worship him, so God heard their cry. We know the story sent Moses and told Moses to go down into Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Pharaoh went and delivered the message, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened. But as Moses began to tell him that God had sent him, and Pharaoh wanted to know, who is your God? And we find Moses told him, my God is I am that I am. Does anybody know that God? I am able to do what I want to do. I'm able to do anything that I want to do. I am sovereign, and I don't have to ask anybody. God brought them out of the land of Egypt, brought them across the Red Sea, down through the wilderness. We find that God had provided for them food in the wilderness, clothing that did not wear out. Came across serpents and came across harsh times, but God was with them. Had enabled them to be able to come and to be free in a land that was known as flowing with milk and honey. Now we find that God was requiring of the children of Israel, the older ones, the leaders, not to forget. When you get into the promised land, when you start living in those houses that you you didn't build, when you start eating grapes from the vines in which you didn't plant, when you start enjoying the pleasure of freedom, he said, don't forget. I wish I had somebody to help me to pray. Don't forget, don't act like you don't know where you've come from. But I want you to remember where you came from. That you did not come on your own, but it was me that brought you through. And as the Lord began to tell him, I don't want you to just remember yourself, but I want you to tell your children. I want you to tell your children. I want you to them to be reminded of where they've come from. And we find that the Lord says, least ye forget. And we get to the point sometimes that we forget some things. We forget where we've come from. We forget what the Lord has done for us. There's a time in which we need to remember and not to forget. Let me go down a little memory lane with us. This being Black History Month, we need to remember as a people where the Lord has brought us from. We need to remember that our foreparent was brought to this country and they were made slaves. They did not have control of themselves. They were bought. And it was known unto them that they didn't belong to themselves, but belonged to a slave master. They were not free. They had to do what the slave master told them to do. They were under bondage. They didn't have their own houses to live in, but they lived in the slave master house. They worked the slave master crop. Slave master had control over them. I want to say this here because, beloved, we that are senior citizens, we that have a little age on us, we need to tell our children where we've come from. Lest they forget. Because we are living in some nice houses now. We're going to some nice schools now. Lest we forget. But we were made slaves, and in this slavery they did not own anything. They did not even own themselves. The bed they slept in. Although there were some of the men there had married wives. But the wives did not belong to them. The slave master would come and take the man's wife and do what he wanted to do with them. And the husband wasn't able to do anything about it. Criticized them. Talked about them, beat them. I'm talking about beat them. Not the beating that we call now beating, but they were beat with whips. Whips all across their back. Some limbs was cut off. Misused. They were not considered as citizens. Didn't have any rights. Lest we forget. Then we come and we find that there was a time that there was a wall between the North and the South. Because the North was free states and the South was slave states. There was a decree that was declared unto them that in the war, or after the war, that there will be an Emancipation Proclamation. But we must remember the Emancipation Proclamation did not really free. It was not the intent of the president to really free the slaves, but his intentions were to save the Union. But we come to find out in order for the Union to be saved, they had to be together. So therefore, the decree was issued. But then there had to come the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery, lest we forget. But then after slavery was abolished, it wasn't over then. Come on, tell somebody it wasn't over then. Because there was still a case, a situation that was known as segregation. Segregation, although you may have been free, but you was only free for such a distance. You were not free to eat where you wanted to eat. You were not free to use the restroom where you wanted to use it. There was a difference between the black and the white. There was color and there was white. The black man still was not considered as full citizens, simply because he didn't have full rights. Still abused, still accused, still talked about, still called men called boys. Our ladies was called girls, not being full citizens, lest we forget where we've come from. We need to tell our young people that it haven't been like this always. During the time of segregation, there was a time in which the black kids did not go to school with white kids. We did not ride the bus side by side. There was separation everywhere. We need to be reminded that the black only had the lower paying jobs, worked for the whites, separated in every way, even fed at different places. Couldn't go to the front of the restaurant, but had to go to a back door, and somebody would hand you a hamburger or a hot dog out of the back door. Lest we forget. Didn't have hotels in which we could go to, check in at the hotel. But many of the blacks would stop at what are known as roadside parks, take a nap while they were on their way. If you wasn't careful, somebody would come and wake them up and tell them you got to move and get out of the way, lest you forget. I've been there, done that. But look where the Lord has brought us from. We need to remind our children where we've come from. Because now we take it for granted that everything is all right. Segregation, you think is over, but it's still not over. In many cases, it is alive and well. Sometimes you're looked at in the face and laughed at. But behind your back, you're talked about. Don't think that everybody that laughs in your face is your friend. I remember being educated in segregated schools, in which they would give the new books to the white kids. After they had used them a couple of years, then they would pass them down to us. Ride the bus while we walk. Spit on us while they rode by. Cut off the road in order to run you in the ditch. I still don't understand why we stay in the road while the car comes. I still hit this ditch. Somebody tell the Lord thank you. Where we find so many people are dying simply because they stand in the road. Y'all praying for me? I need some prayers now. Because I remember, I haven't forgotten those days. Amen. Now we look. There was a time in which, my sisters and brothers, which a black man would not touch a white girl. Would not get close to them, lest we forget. See, I remember Emmett Till, the little young boy that came from Chicago down south to Money, Mississippi, to visit his family. And he was accused of whistling at a white woman. Accused. While he went home and was in his bed at night with the family that he was staying with. White men came and took him out of his bed, carried him down the river, castrated him, made him swallow his own pride, threw him